Hello, Jasmine.
Hi, Isaac. Good to
You
see
okay?
you. Yeah,
Keeping
I'm
well?
not too bad, thank you.
Good. So, just for the sake of our viewers, this is Jasmine. She's been a member of the congregation of Yahweh for many years now. In fact, from birth. So, Jasmine, would you like to share a little about your journey in the congregation?
Yes, I have been attending this church since, yeah, a wee dot. Um, Coming along with my mum and my brother and three of my sisters. I accepted Yeshua as my savior from a very early year. And I've been following after him ever since, although sometimes with its heartaches and pains. But there has been times of great joy as well. So, it's a mixture. We were never promised an easy road. So, yeah, you have to take the good with the rough, as it were.
Yes.
And the deep desire, I've always had a faith, and my faith is deep, and I've always had the desire to serve Yeshua. And so regardless of what comes my way, that desire has never gone away, and it's still there, and that's why I'm still here today. I've been in various parts of the country. So I was raised in Nottingham till I was about 10. I moved to Birmingham, and from Birmingham I moved up to the northeast, and I was up in the northeast for nigh on 26 years, and then now I'm back in Nottingham. All very different places, giving me lots of experience, and yeah, very different, and some challenges as well along the way. And yeah, I'm back in my hometown, and back in church life still, and just, yeah, being me.
Being you.
Yeah.
Good. So, church plays kind of a major part in your life, really, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does.
So really, you've done full circle then. You know, the fact that you started off in Nottingham and that you come back to Nottingham, and that has given you lots of experience.
Yes, it sure has. It sure has. It's been good to have had the different experiences, living in the different places, and yeah. So I'm back here in Nottingham with my husband Stuart, and yeah, we're with church, and yeah, it's good.
Good. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about your journey that the journey has thrown up some challenges. We are currently in a situation that is a challenge for a lot of people, that being COVID-19. And that has been dominating a lot of our media platforms. But something else that has been dominating our media platforms is the unjust treatment of George Floyd, which came to the attention of the world media on the 25th of May of this year. And that the reaction of that was kind of worldwide, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it affected the whole world. It affected both people who were black and white from all walks of life. Now, as a person of colour, how has this situation affected you?
Well, at first, it was one of surprise. My response was one of surprise, because I couldn't believe how it rippled across the world. Because there has been instances before, and it's not gone so much on a big scale as it has this time. And I think it's, people had had enough of unfair treatment of a human, first and foremost. But not just a human, it was another black human another black life, another one too many. And so people started to take action in different ways, such as attending protests, signing petitions, trying to educate themselves on racism. And, you know, there was also people calling people out on Facebook and other social media platforms because of their racist views or things that they were saying. So it was a positive response, but to injustice, I thought. But it obviously also raised issues for people who are racist, and were, you know, trying to make it their aim to upset Black people. I personally, on that note, I had a friend on Facebook, and she then blocked me and said she was a racist and I should get lost, basically. And that wasn't just directed at me, that was directed at all Black, her so-called Black friends. So yeah, it wasn't good in that sense. That was quite negative.
Yeah, I mean, that can be quite hurtful, especially when it's someone that you have perceived to be your friend. I think one thing that people have realised is that media platforms, in whatever form they come, can be used for both positive and negative.
Yes.
And we see that played out in this situation. And I agree that, you know, you mentioned the unjust treatment of a human being and another Black person. Could you just elaborate a bit more on that? Is that coming from the fact that there have been instances before where other people of Black origin have been mistreated?
Yes, there are lots of times when Black people have been mistreated, mainly in America, but also across here in the UK. Black people are treated awful by society and by people who are in positions of trust, such as the police. You know, Black people are more likely to be stopped and searched. They're more likely to be shot by the police, because I don't know really what is behind it, whether it's fear or something like that. I don't really know, but it's almost like someone gets an idea that this Black person's going to do evil to the white person. Yeah. Look at Stephen Lawrence. Yeah. His life was lost cruelly just because he was Black. You know, and it's instances like that you know, is unjust.
Yes.
You know, and it's not nice.
No, I think for me, as a white person, I admit that I was not aware of the depth of feeling that derived from what happened to George Floyd. And it only really hit home with me when I saw that documentary about the Windrush scandal.
Right.
And at that point, if I was to be brutally honest, I was ashamed to be white. You know, I was ashamed to belong to a country that treated a Black person in the way that they were treated. And something that is passed around in the media. I use the word passed around not to say that it's not true, because it really is. is true, but something that has come to the forefront of our attention is the systematic discrimination, treatment of others. And I think because of what happened with George Floyd, it has awoken people's perception of what has been going on, not only in our own community, in our country, across the world. And for some, it's awoken emotions, possibly deriving from personal experience. I suppose what I'd like to ask is, is this a reality for you, in that there are some personal emotions from your journey, as a person of colour?
Yes, and it really affected me. I've been through a range of emotions, and it has ranged from being angry to being frustrated to being sad. And if I'm being completely honest, it has really drained me. And I felt like, some of the times I felt like, what's the point? And that's part of my frustration, because people didn't understand. Also, partly because, as I mentioned earlier, about this so-called friend who then showed true colours, that they're saying that they're racist. It's just like, a range of emotions for me. And even though I was born in the UK, I still suffer that racism.
And do you think that goes across the board in terms of, obviously there is the issue with authority in terms of people being mistreated at the hands of those that should know better, but there are also systems that we adhere to, such as the government, education, the workplace. In your opinion, do you see this kind of mistreatment in those kind of sectors?
Yes, there has been. And there's always this thing where it's not necessarily said out, spoken, but there are underlying currents. And it's also that when you look at most places where people work, it's predominantly white people that are taking the senior posts and are in those sort of positions. And similarly in education for the children, it was like when I was growing up, it was, the black boys don't do very well. But it was almost like they didn't consider, why aren't the black boys doing very well? Is it because they're more practical people? Because we all have different learning styles. Yes. And, it's almost like they were shunned before being given a chance.
Yes.
And I think throughout society, there are various things on various levels that happens to people of colour.
Yes, I can appreciate that. You mentioned in part of our introduction about your faith and your journey through the church. Do you think that your faith has helped you in some way address this issue?
I see the Saviour of the world, Yeshua, as my example to love. And regardless of what colour I am, Yeshua died for me. So in so much as he died for me, he's died for you. We're different colours, but we all have the same heartbeat. We're all belonging to his family, you know, the church. And I choose to focus on him rather than all the situations, because if I focused on all the situations, it can lead me to hatred. Although I'm not saying I haven't focused on the situations, but I don't allow it to fill me with hate. Because that is only damaging myself and how I perceive other people and what I pour out, spill out in talk, you know. So I don't want to be that awful person. I'm following Yeshua. I want to become like him. So I don't want evil, because that's what hatred is, to spill out onto other people, because that wouldn't be right, because two wrongs don't make a right. My mum always used to tell me that.
Yeah, my mum too. I think we're of a similar generation in that respect. I mean, belonging to a church family has its benefits, and the scripture does tell us that if one person suffers, you know, we all suffer. In your honest opinion, do you think that there is an awareness within the church body that this issue is affecting some of our members more than we actually know?
Well, I don't know that there is a great awareness. I think there could be more awareness. But speaking on a personal level, just because I grew up in church doesn't mean to say I didn't experience these things. I may not have experienced racism as a young black man, because obviously a lot of young black men have racism chucked at them in various forms. But because I am black, I did experience racism. And sometimes I think people aren't aware of something that might affect. So, for instance, I was called Choc Pud Jazz as I was growing up. And the reason I was called that was because I was a large girl. I was quite big, and I am black. So I was called Choc Pud Jazz. And whilst that might have seemed endearing to some, that stayed with me throughout my life. And it actually affected me in how I looked at myself and how I thought other people thought about me. So you can be saying something in all innocence, as it were, or was it innocent? Because would you call if a white girl was big, what would you call that girl? If I was white and the same size, what would you call me? Yeah. So I think people just need to be aware of what they say, because it does affect. You know, it's the same. Similarly, if you say a child stupid, they'll grow up thinking they're stupid because that's what's been passed on to them. But you know, I've had a lot of name calling, and that does affect me. Not necessarily within the church, name calling, but that chop pud was. But you know, externally, lots of name calling. You know, the fact that I went to London with Stuart, and we were staying down there, and we were going to go out for the day, so we queued up for the taxis. People in front of us, they were picked up and taken, and then the taxi came to pick Stuart and me up, and the guy looked and then drove straight off, and in the back of his car it had Combat 18. And so Combat 18 is a Nazi group. And so clearly Stuart was white, I'm black. He's obviously seen us together and thought, well, he's not picking either of us up. So drove off.
And that's racism, isn't it?
That's racism.
Right in your face.
Yeah.
I mean, just in some cultures, you say that you were large when you're growing up. In some cultures, that's, people are considered healthy, if they're not, and I think the thing we're getting at here is, name calling affects, most people at a young age. But I think the difference with yourself is that it was predominantly related to your colour.
Yes.
So that was the issue,
yes.
that you were facing. And as a congregation, we have a long history, with Black people being a part of our membership.
Mm-hmm.
And the reaction that we see from a global perspective has arisen because of the treatment of, I'll say Black person, other people say the treatment of a person of colour. It depends on what really is the political, right term. But on the flip side, I was one of them myself.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our white members may feel a measure of guilt because they are white. How do you feel about that? Do you want to relay something to our white members?
Yeah.
Maybe feeling this way?
Yeah. What I would say is don't feel guilty, because you can't help the colour of your skin. The same as I can't help the colour of my skin. So there's no point feeling guilty about it. I don't think you should feel guilty about it. What I feel is that you should feel empowered to do something if you see racial discrimination, or you see a situation which is unjust. Do something about that. The fact that sometimes people remain silent or lack action can indicate sometimes that everything's all right, and it could seem that they agree with the injustice taking place. We all have prejudices of some kind. And I think it's about recognizing our own thoughts and ensuring that we're not being discriminatory. It's about recognizing your own thoughts and seeing what you can do. Take ownership about what you can do. Take ownership what you can see. If you see something that's not right, take ownership and try and do something about it. It may not be that you confront, because obviously that can lead to another ball game of things, but there are things you can do as an individual. You can ask questions, educate yourself, put yourself in somebody else's shoes who is receiving that unjust treatment. See how it would feel. So it doesn't come across like you condone what's happening. But for me, really, it's not a blame game. This is not a blame game. And for me, it's about doing what's right. If injustice, I need to do something about it. And that would go for anybody. It doesn't matter what colour you are.
No.
If you see injustice, do something about it. Don't be racked with guilt, because you can't help the skin, the body you were born into.
Sure. And I think
that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think this issue demands that everybody of any colour is self-reflective.
Yes.
Looking inwards to see how we can better our treatment of others. Yeshua himself, he gave us the golden rule for living, and that was to treat others as we ourselves would like to be treated.
Yeah.
And I think it's in the book of Isaiah, in the Bible, it says, we read, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and please the widow's cause. So we all have a responsibility, as believers, to address, injustice if we see it happening.
And that's what because what I was going to say is we're all part of one race, the human race.
Yes.
We're all the same. We may not be the same colour, but if you cut me, I bleed.
Yes.
Red blood, the same as if I cut you.
Yes.
You bleed red blood. It's not green, yellow, or different colours. It's all the same. We're part of the human race. Yahweh made us in his image, soul, heart, spirit. And we're the same.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Keeping on the topic of the church family, there are a number of people within our church, and because we are a multicultural membership, some people may stand back and look at this issue, and in the truth of their heart will say, I don't have a problem, with black people or people of colour.
Yeah.
Well, this is clearly not the issue that we're addressing, is it? Because it's not that we don't have a problem with people of colour. It's recognising the effect that this issue is having on our black membership. Would you think that's a correct analysis of what we're actually looking at?
Yes, I've sometimes, if something doesn't affect you, we don't always see what's going on. Okay, and whilst, yes, we have a multicultural congregation, the problem isn't having an issue with black people. The way I see it is it's this systemic racial discrimination within society that infiltrates people's minds and thinking, sometimes without people actually realizing it. That's what the problem is. It isn't that you have a problem with my colour of my skin. It's what society has done.
Yeah.
The way society is set up, it gives more privileges to people who are white. And sometimes that's in very covert ways.
Yeah.
And if you are of white descent, you have inherited some of this, whether you know it or not. It's a bit like a gene you were born with. So although you may not think this affects you in some way, well, actually, this is part of what society has set up. So if you are white, classed as a white person, you are given more privileges than me. Yeah. That's what society sets up. And I was reading something the other day from this organisation called the Remy Mead Trust, which is a leading independent race equality think tank. And in 2019, I'll just read what this says. It says, structural racism is encrypted in the very fabric of our society history, our institutions and policies. That's what the problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah? That's what the problem is. It isn't about being black. It's institutional, structural racism, you know, and that can be hard to hear.
Of course, yeah.
But it is fact.
Mm.
That's what society has done.
And I think a lot of people may not realise how deep this issue goes. And you mentioned education before, and I think if people are willing to be educated, then we're some way in addressing this issue. You know, if we're willing to be educated. Okay. In closing, as a multicultural congregation, you know, there are benefits. You know, we benefit from each other's culture. I certainly benefit. I love Caribbean food, and you know, I really appreciate Caribbean food. In fact, I order it every week. That's one benefit. That might be quite carnal, but that's one benefit on my part. I love Caribbean food. But it also tells us in the book of Acts that Yahweh shows no favoritism, but accepts men and women from every nation who fear him and do what is right. Do you think the church body can do more to embrace that concept?
Yes, I really do. I think, you know, in Yeshua's day, when he walked this earth, he accepted anybody and everybody, from the beggar on the street to the tax collector to a woman who committed adultery. He didn't have, you know, you couldn't say that was his type of person. He didn't discriminate.
No. And
I think sometimes we can get a bit blinkered. And I've got to say also that Yeshua in his day, he called people out. He called people out when he saw injustice happening. And, you know, we as a church, we need to do the same. If we see injustice happening, we need to call it out and call it out in love.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what Yeshua did. And he was, you know, I think we tend to think, well, we can't be angry at this and we can't be angry at that. But we're not talking about just being angry, because being angry can be sinful. But if we are angry at something which is unjust that's happening, then that is a righteous anger. And we can deal with that, because, you know, Yeshua got angry and he didn't sin. He was righteous in his anger.
Yes.
And I think we can do things in righteous anger, because if you do it that way, people don't tend to be offended with what you say. It's when we step out of the righteous anger into pure anger, which is wrong. And I think if we as a church, we can educate, maybe have informal sessions where we talk about, you know, our history. Maybe have sessions where we are encouraging different cultures to have, like, maybe have a cultural evening where you talk about the history and you talk about what's gone on, and with a fun element as well, maybe food, as that always speaks to people. You know, it educates people, and people are, you know, able to see where you're coming from and how you deal with things. You know, and I think we need to continue to have open and honest communications, because I think when you are open and honest and not so easily offended by somebody saying, well, actually that upsets me because that relates to my color.
Yes.
Or something like that, or it feels like it's a discriminatory comment that you've made. For us to do it in love and to be open but be honest, because that is possible. And you know, if we love each other, then we should be able to do these things, you know, and also not to put people in boxes, because I think that's what society does.
Yes.
It sort of typecasts Black people as, you know, drug dealers and, you know, up to no good, and, you know, all these stereotypical negative things can infiltrate people's minds and thinking. And I have actually found myself in that place where I've thought something bad of another Black young man, because I'm thinking, but where did you know that, Jasmine? You know that because that's what society says about that person, and it may not be true. So it's about not putting people in boxes, and not thinking you know all the answers about that person, or that race or that culture, because we don't always have the answers.
No.
But you know, if we love him, we are going to allow his love to come out from us, and it will break down barriers.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the big issues at the moment. It's the barrier of racism and discrimination, you know, that needs to be broken. Thank you for sharing, Jasmine. I think one thing that we have learned with this issue, especially for myself, being a white person, is that I have to be on my guard with things that I say, whether it's for a joke or not, you know, and it's the way I say things and how that can be perceived by another individual. And you mentioned being open and honest. I think part of that is being willing to listen.
Yes.
And if you ask somebody how are they, be prepared to listen to how they are, you know. So thank you for sharing. I really appreciate your honesty, and I'm sure our viewers appreciate it. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for listening.